Hey everyone, it's Kenji. I'm going to show you how to reverse sear a big steak. So, the reverse sear, and I know people are going to start talking about this in the comments, but the reverse sear is a process that I developed when I was working at Cooks Illustrated around 2006 or so. And when I say I developed, I just want to be clear. When I say I developed, I'm not claiming to be the first person to ever do this because it's pretty clear that I'm not. At the time, the reverse sear was not really a known technique. In the period since we published that in 2007, some people have brought it to my attention, mainly Meathead over at AmazingRibs.com, where you can find a full history of the reverse sear. It was brought to my attention that a guy named Chris Finney was for, I think it was the barbecue team is called Iron Pig Barbecue, but he was writing on barbecue forums about doing the reverse sear a couple of years before I published it in Cooks Illustrated. I'm confident in saying that. Well, I came up with the process independently. I sort of modeled it after sous vide because we were cooking sous vide in restaurants a lot those days. And that until we published it in Cooks Illustrated, it was definitely not like a mainstream process. Certainly not what it is now. We didn't originally call it the reverse sear. We just called it, I don't remember what we called it. We called it a new way to pan sear steaks. Anyhow, the process, regardless of the origins of it, the process is based on the idea behind sous vide, which is where rather than the traditional method of cooking steak, where you would, in a restaurant, what you would do is you would sear it over very high heat, either on a grill or under a broiler or in a pan, and then you would slide it into an oven to finish cooking. That method works really well if your goal is to cook steaks fast, which is usually your goal in a restaurant. But what it does is it ends up giving you a sort of gradient, a temperature gradient, where the very center might be medium rare or whatever temperature you want it, and then as you get closer to the edges, it gets more and more well done. So you get this kind of bullseye pattern. What the reverse sear does is you reverse the order of those things. So you start it in a low temperature oven. In this case, we're going to go with a 250 degree oven. You start with a low temperature oven, and then you let it come up to temp. And then you take it out and sear it at the end. And what that gives you, which you'll see at the end, is that it gives you a very perfectly even doneness from all the way from edge to center. So what I've got here is this works especially well for thick steaks, by the way. It's not really worth it for anything thinner than like 1.5 inches. This is about 2.5 inch thick, 2.25 to 2.5 inch thick tomahawk. So that's a rib steak. Comes from the loin with a good chunk of spinalis here, which is my favorite part of a steak. Yeah, so we got it seasoned, salt and pepper. That's it. Plenty of salt and pepper. We're gonna put it on this rack on a sheet tray. I'm gonna slide a temperature probe into it. Okay, you want to go in the side and get it towards the center, as close to the center as you can. I have this temperature probe alarm set at 125 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I'm going to slide it right into a 250 degree oven. And it's going to stay in there until it gets to 125 degrees Fahrenheit, which is going to be medium rare. It should take, a steak that thick is probably going to take about 2 hours at this temperature. So this is a technique you use when you got some time on your hands. In fact, you could also add some time to the steak if you want, if you have too much time on your hands. All right, so I will see you back here once this goes off, which should be in just about an hour and 45 minutes, so not quite 2 hours actually. We're at 123.8 degrees, so getting pretty close to 125. You could let it go all the way to 125. Anywhere between 120 and 125, even up to around 130 is gonna be in that medium rare range. All right, so now that we're getting close to done, we gotta get ready for the searing portion. So what I've got is this baking steel griddle. I'm only using this big one because that's a tomahawk steak and it's not going to fit inside a normal pan. So with a tomahawk steak like that, you would either do it on something like this, like a flat griddle with a channel, or you can finish it on your grill. Of course, with a smaller steak that fits in a pan, you can do this on a pan, so cast iron. But what you want to do is you want to really, really preheat it till it's ripping hot, so like smoking hot, okay? Because the idea is that now you're going to spend as little time as possible actually searing the meat. You want to build up a crust, and that's about it. So the longer it takes over high heat like that, the longer it takes on a burner, the more sort of that gradient inside is going to get built up. So your goal is really just to sear it as fast as possible. That's the whole point of sort of separating the cooking into two different steps. All right, so I'm going to take this probe out now. And I'm going to double check my temperature. You also want to double check your temperature with an actual not a leave-in probe, because a leave-in probe can actually transmit heat down its length, so it'll give you a sort of false positive high readings. You always want to double check with a handheld thermometer. All right, we're good. We're at 126, 127, so we're going to be right around that sort of mid-rare to medium range, which is, for a fatty cut like ribeye, that's the temperature I like to go. I like to go a little bit hotter than rare, or a little hotter than even sort of the low end of medium rare, because you really want to get it warm enough, or at least I want to get it warm enough that the fat's going to start to render a little bit. All right, so we are smoking hot, which means we're about ready to start searing. Looking good. So one of the reasons you start in a low oven like that is because what happens is, if you have a raw steak, there's a lot of surface moisture, and it takes a lot of energy to evaporate that surface moisture. It takes about 5 times more energy to evaporate a drop of water than it does to take that water all the way from 0 degrees to 100 degrees Celsius. So the thing that takes the most energy when you're searing a steak is surface moisture, evaporating surface moisture. So by starting in a low oven, you end up drying off all that moisture. So what you see here is not actually like steak juices. What you're seeing there is fat, and that's going to help the steak sear better. All right, so just a little bit of oil. This is rice bran oil. You could use any kind of neutral high temp oil, rice bran, canola, something like that, grapeseed. And I'm gonna weigh this guy down with my chef's presses. Oh, by the way, Bruce Hill, the inventor of the chef's press, who's based here in California, based in the Bay Area, when we did that charity sale a couple weeks back, through the end of July, he said it was the highest selling month ever for the product, and he donated somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 to Black Lives Matter, and yeah. So thank you all for buying the chef's presses during that time. You can still get them at chefspress.com. I don't take any money from them. I never take money from for sponsorships. Anything that I recommend, I'm doing of my own will. No money ever exchanged for recommendations. So I use these all the time. They're really great for things like this. You see how big the steak is, and I can shingle them to really get a nice even sear across the whole surface. All right. Let's see how we're doing here. Doing good. I think you can go just a little bit longer on that first side. So if you were cooking sous vide, you would do a very similar thing. You would cook the steak to whatever temperature you want to serve it at. You want whatever internal temperature you want, so it could be 120, 125, 130. Then you'd, in a restaurant setting, what you would do is you would leave the steak in the water bath for service. And then when someone orders the steak, you take it out and sear it. That way you can have perfectly cooked steak reliably, and be able to serve it quite fast. You know, the other nice thing about the reverse sear compared to more traditional cooking methods is that window of perfect doneness is much wider. So when you're cooking in a traditional way with a very hot oven or a very hot pan, it's very quickly going to rise from, say, 125 up to 135. It could take a couple minutes. Maybe even less if you're cooking hot enough. So that's a very small window you have to get it precisely done the way you want it. What the reverse sear does is that it gives you more like probably 10 or 15 or even 20 minutes before it starts to overcook in the oven. So you have a much higher likelihood that you're going to get a steak cooked exactly the way you want it when you do a reverse sear. Yeah, look at that. Look at that browning. All right. Last but not least, we're going to make sure that we sear this side. I'm just gripping it with a towel like this. I actually prefer reverse sear, even though the technique, originally I developed it to be able to sort of mimic sous vide at home. I actually prefer the technique over sous vide, mainly because you get that dry surface when you're reverse searing, so you can actually sear the meat better than you can a sous vide steak. And moreover, it renders the fat a little bit better than the sous vide technique does. So you end up with, I think, just a better finished product overall. All right, and we are done. All right, let me get a board to serve this on. Should we cut into it? Shall we see how we did? I'm just going to split her kind of open right now, just so I can show you that how that temperature gradient works inside. There you go. Look at that. Beautiful. You see that temperature gradient? Or that lack of temperature gradient? That's really that is what the sous vide, what the reverse sear gets you. This steak is big enough to serve at least 4 people for dinner, I'd say. 4 hungry people even. Look at that. Perfect. Perfect. Shabu. Come on. Well, they are in for a treat today. Shabu, here you go. Here you go, buddy. All right, everyone. That is the reverse sear. Thank you all for watching, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.